all to our amazing, first of all, amazing turnout for all these people that have come to join us this evening. I think it's terrific. My name is Izzy Abrams, and I am the president of the JCC. And I am thrilled that we have really gotten a wonderful Jewish Book Month underway. I'd like to thank, before I forget, Howard and Sharon Rich, who are our overall sponsors for Jewish Book Month, and Richard and Esther Zelinsky, who are sponsoring this evening's program. I would like to just remind everyone to shut their cell phones off. Okay? Please do that. I would especially like to thank the committee, the Jewish Book Month Committee. Can I ask them to stand, please?
Go ahead, I understand.
Come on, ladies. Let's do it. And to Diane Knopf, our chair, and to Sarah Ewing. Boy, she's everywhere. I'd like to thank Amy Gold and Will Potter from the Epstein Hillel School in which you are sitting, because we wouldn't have been able to run this event if you people hadn't been here and opened your doors to us. So thank you. Before we go any further, I would like to just ask if we could take a moment of silence to remember those who perished this past Shabbat on Saturday in Squirrel Park. So if we can just remember. Thank you. I'd like to now introduce Karen Medorsky, who will introduce our speaker and the women that are with our speaker this evening. Karen.
Thank you. It is my great pleasure to introduce my dear friend Phyllis Karras. Phyllis has been a writer for most of her life. In addition to writing for the Boston Globe and other local newspapers, she taught magazine writing in the School of Journalism at Boston University for years, and is the author of 12 books, including 4 young adult books, The Onassis Women, which received $1 million advance, and Brutal, the untold story of my life inside Whitey Bulger's South Boston mob, which was on the New York Times bestseller list. In order to write Brutal, Phyllis had to interview Kevin Weeks in depth. Kevin was, to say the very least, an unmotivated and very uncooperative person. During the summer of 2006, Phyllis spoke to Kevin for hours on the phone at night. And in the morning, she would recount her conversations to me as we took long walks. Boy, did I get an education. Stories of murder, robbery, dirt naps, the FBI most wanted list, and Whitey. Yet, when my husband Jerry and I had dinner at the Karras' home with Kevin Weeks, it was hard to reconcile the picture of the man whose dark deeds I had listened to on so many mornings, with the same man sitting beside us, eating Phyllis's delicious barbecue chicken and talking about his sons and the Red Sox. When Phyllis became friends with Anna Weeks, who was Kevin's girlfriend at the time, we often wondered about Anna's life. This curiosity led to the Southie women. Through Phyllis, I have had the privilege to also become friends with Anna. When Anna and Phyllis were recently interviewed by Channel 5, I was the designated babysitter. I've also had the pleasure of getting to know Karen Weeks-Wraith and Nancy Young. I have the utmost respect for these strong women, and I am so happy that you all will have the opportunity to get to know them tonight.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you. And thank all of you for coming. Needless to say, things have been happening today that threw me for a bit of a loop. In case you've been hiding under a rock, you might have heard that James Whitey Bulger was found dead in his cell this morning. And I have to tell you why this throws me so much. In June 2011, Kevin Weeks and I wrote a fictional book called Where's Whitey? On the day of our very big first book signing, 4 hours after the book signing began, we were notified that James Whitey Bulger had been found in Santa Monica. We had written this brilliant book about where he had been, in Spain and in England and all over the world. And there he is, after 18 years on the run. He has to be found on the day we publish Where's Whitey? Needless to say, the book died. However, I am thrilled to be here today with a different book and with a different Weeks, 2 different Weeks. It is especially special for me to be here tonight, along with my 3 Southie women, Anna Weeks, Nancy Young, and Karen Weeks-Rakes. The 4 of us were at the South Boston Public Library on Thursday night, and it was a warm and joyous homecoming for these Southie women. And there I was, the lady from the suburbs, surrounded by the women from the city, and it was a terrific opportunity to have another first-row view into my Southie ladies' world. Tonight, I see as sort of my homecoming, looking at the faces of my precious family and friends who have supported me so lovingly during my journey with these women. Now I am so pleased to introduce all of those who reside in the distant suburbs to 3 of the 6 city women whose lives have inexorably changed mine. Southie has indeed come to marvel it tonight, and I could not be prouder to deliver them here. But before I let you meet them, let me just tell you very briefly how this nice Jewish lady from Marblehead, who honestly never knew the difference between South Boston and the South End, who rarely saw much of Boston other than the world of journalism at BU, and who certainly had never heard of this Whitey Bulger, found her life so deeply connected with these 3 women, as well as with the other 3 Southie women. All of this happened because one of these women, Anna Weeks, who is truly my co-author in so many ways in this book. When I first met Anna, she was the future wife of Kevin Weeks, Whitey Bulger's chief lieutenant for 25 years. Kevin was about to be released from prison for his part in 5 of Whitey Bulger's murders. In a plan to help Kevin avoid wrongful death suits from the victims' families, lawyers for the families created a plan whereby Kevin would tell his story of his life with the South Boston Irish mob, with half of his profits from the book going to the victims' families. This would erase the prospect of future wrongful death suits so Kevin could find employment and the families could receive a decent payment schedule. Everything seemed fine with the plan, except for the small fact that the last thing Kevin ever wanted was to tell his story of crimes committed under the guise of darkness. And even worse was the fact that the lawyers had decided, based on my book, recent book, with Bulger low-level leg breaker, Eddie McKenzie, that I would be the fortunate writer of such a memoir. It wasn't that Kevin knew and hated me, at least not yet. It was the fact that he knew and hated Mackenzie and deemed the memoir I had written with him far from truthful. An opinion I sadly came to agree with years later. Long story short, once Kevin was released from prison, we began to write his story. And things could not have been, as Karen intimated, more difficult. It was absolutely crucial that Kevin's story be 100% truthful. Otherwise, he could head back to jail on perjury charges. For example, if he told me the crime was committed on July 23rd, 1987, and I wrote July 24th, 1987, that would put him in serious legal danger. Night after night, Kevin and I talked, or rather he yelled, convinced I knew absolutely nothing about extortion, money laundering, bookmaking, and the VIG or the juice, never mind murder. Not only was he right, but to make it worse, he could not have been a worse teacher. So many nights he would hang up on me, swearing he would never talk to me again, and I was equally certain that the book, and possibly even me, were heading for a dirt nap. Yet somehow, thanks to only one person, his adored girlfriend, Anna, Kevin would call back, and we would make some progress. Anna, I could not help but think, was such an interesting character, so much more than her boyfriend. An inner Boston City school teacher, still legally married to a man who had spent most of their 25 years together in prison, Anna was warm, intelligent, kind, and a force to be reckoned with. I was especially intrigued when Kevin would receive a phone call from Anne while talking to me, or rather screaming at me. His voice would change dramatically the minute he heard her voice, sounding actually human, as he hung up for me with a quick, "It's Anna, gotta go." During the year it took me to get the necessary material from Kevin, I got to know Anna equally as well. Since she was my one link to Kevin, I was deeply grateful as well as interested in her. Somehow, we began meeting in Revere Beach on weekends or during her school vacations, taking long walks as she told me about her first marriage, her attempts to divorce her imprisoned husband, the years of abuse she had suffered at his hands, and her fear of getting more involved with a man like Kevin Weeks. As for how that story turned out, I will leave it to Anna to tell you exactly. But I will say that once Kevin's book was finished and became a New York Times bestseller, Kevin and I actually stopped shrieking at one another, and we became friends. And long before that happened, Anna and I had become even more friends, special friends. And I was certain that her story was so much more fascinating than Kevin's. The fact that Anna had written copious notes about their life together inspired me even more to tell her story. And when she introduced me to Nancy and Karen and the three other women whose lives were pretty nearly as intriguing, I knew that Anna and I had a book. I would like to read to you just a few pages of each of these Southie women's stories, and then let you have the opportunity to hear directly from the three of them of the six who are here. Of course, we would be delighted to answer any questions you might have, but it would be great if you could hold those questions until you have heard from all three of these women. I want to add that talking in front of a crowd this large as the one we have here today is a bit intimidating for these three women, but I can assure you there is little that each of them cannot do. That is an absolute fact. Now first let me introduce you to the women who are not here today. Tori Donlin, Elaine Donlin, and Marie Hardy. Tori starts out with, "I was a pain in the ass for most of my 40 years," says Tori Donlin, the freckle-faced redhead who still turns heads with her understated prettiness and swimmer's body. You wouldn't expect less from a fifth-generation Southie woman. Tori is the second oldest of Elaine Sweeney McGuire's 37 and growing grandchildren, a high honor since Elaine McGuire is considered the matriarch of Southie. But can you even imagine 37 grandchildren? Life changed drastically for Tori when she was 19 and had her wisdom teeth pulled. When the doctor gave her a Vicodin prescription, her boyfriend told her to say Vicodin made her sick and get a new prescription for Percocet. "I did," she said, and then I thought, whoa, this is so easy. Drugs from doctors' prescriptions continued to be an easy reach for her. People I hung out with were so much easier for me to be with now. I'm pretty intelligent, and I also like the hustle of the lifestyle. I'd been experimenting with some drugs when I was 17. Now at 19, I was a daily user. Waiting for a drug dealer was a lot faster than standing in line trying to get into a club or a bar to get a drink. By 1997, when she was 20 and had her own failed suicide attempt, Tori found the streets of South Boston infested with Oxycontin. "I continued to work the system," she says. But in 6 or 7 years later, people were dying of heroin here. It was a matter of picking your poison. I stopped hanging around with people who weren't using drugs. By 21, I had moved off from Oxycontin and graduated to heroin. Everything in her life changed again one afternoon in 2002 when Tori was 25. She was lying on her younger sister's bed watching television and waiting for her dealer to call her back. I knew nothing about the military, she says, but this commercial came on called Accelerate Your Life, about the Navy. It gave a number to call, and pretty stoned at the time, I made the call. All I knew was that I didn't have 10 cents to my name, not a job, and I had to get out of Southie. 10 minutes later, her drug dealer arrived with her drugs. And 10 minutes after that, the local Navy recruiter was at her house. And 3 minutes later, she was being deployed to Baghdad on the USS Boxer, along with 4,000 personnel and 60 other women. Now trained as a medic, Tori found easy access to drugs. Her favorite were the fentanyl morphine patches she used like an EpiPen on herself. A year and a half later, Tori fainted on the desert outside Baghdad. When she recovered, she was astonished to learn she was 5.5 months pregnant. 2 weeks later, she was dishonorably discharged from the Navy and headed back to South Boston. Despite her heavy use of drugs in the Navy, the beautiful baby girl who was born 3 minutes later changed Tori's life yet again, only this time in wonderful and magical ways. I will leave it to you to read the rest of Tori's story. Elaine McGuire Donlin, Tori's mother. Hyannis had the Kennedys, Southie had the McGuires. It's a bold statement, but when it comes to the vast reach of this enormous family's heritage, the McGuires have earned their mainstay position in Southie. Through Tori's mother, Elaine McGuire Donlin's vivid recollections of a childhood in Southie, we get a panoramic view of the city of South Boston and a deeper look into the inner workings of the customary way of life of a proud Irish family. The McGuire reputation went far beyond just being large and good-looking. They were strong-willed activists, standing up strongly for justice and the things they believed in mostly that was good for the community of South Boston. Elaine's mother, Tori's remarkable grandmother, Elaine Sweeney McGuire, even managed to work full-time for the telephone company while caring for her brood of 10 kids. She would do the 11 to 7 overnight shift, arriving home in the morning to get her kids out of bed, dressed, fed, and on their way to school. And believe me, we were immaculate every time we left the house, Elaine says. We were all dressed to the nines, looking like we walked out of the bandbox. Us girls with long finger curls and bows in our hair, our school uniforms starched and spotless. It was part of the Southie mother's mindset that their kids had to look perfect every time they left the house for school or for church. No matter how tired she was, our mother polished our shoes and scrubbed our laces clean before she left for work at 11. But it was Elaine's mother who also sent the most fear running through the veins of any kid in Southie, not just her brood of 10. At any time of the day, my mother would come barreling into the projects in her blue beach wagon, yelling like hell, looking at me, and everyone quaked, especially me, Elaine says. My mother never hesitated even for a second to use brute force if one of her kids misbehaved or even annoyed her. As the oldest, I got far more of my share of devastating blows. I promised myself I would never lay hand on one of my kids, and I never have. Still, Elaine Donlin's memories of her Southie childhood are filled with stories of love and laughter. One day, my mother wheeled a couple of us kids in the stroller to go to Bill's, the neighborhood grocery store. When she came out of the store, her arms filled with groceries, she walked home, forgetting about the stroller. An hour later, where she was in the midst of her daily process of hauling her body outside the house in order to complete the task of washing the windows, someone from the store called to say she'd left 2 kids in the stroller. She told them to bring them home, whenever he had a minute. No rush. Even though Elaine was out of school and married during the era of busing, some of her younger brothers and sisters were affected by this difficult situation. St. Augustine had closed its school in 1971, so all of my siblings were mostly in public schools there, Elaine says. Louise Day Hicks was a true hero to us, and so was Mayor Flynn. If I had a gun, I would have killed that Judge Garrity. He did terrible damage to our city by coming down with that desegregation ruling. He gave us an unfair reputation as a racist place where everyone hated blacks, and that was not true. We all got along. The next woman, Marie Falcione Hardy. Despite her own stress and later health problems, Marie had established a reputation as the go-to Southie woman for anyone who needed extra help or extra cash. There was always a family who didn't have a turkey or Thanksgiving or a Christmas tree, Marie said. I was happy to buy and deliver the turkey and make sure the tree was delivered to the front door. Yet there was much in Marie's life that caused her deep pain. Melissa, the youngest of her 4 kids, a beautiful young woman with serious addiction problems, delivered the greatest heartache. When Melissa became pregnant as a teen, I was devastated, Marie said. But I listened to my aunt who told me, you're gonna love this baby, feed it, bathe it, and raise it. And that's what I did, with support from Buddy. Indeed, with her loving companion for 35 years, longshoreman Buddy Norton by her side, Marie lovingly raised Melissa's son, McKinnon, known as Mac. Heartbreakingly, Marie's adored Melissa was inhumanely murdered by the boyfriend she was trying to leave. For Marie's funeral mass at St. Bridget, the church where she had been baptized and made her first Holy Communion, mourners from all walks of life paid their respects to a young woman whose life had been cut short by a brutal murder. When I look back at the day Melissa told me she was pregnant, I know that that day proved the beginning of a blessing. I was 52 when Buddy and I began to raise Mac, and I've loved every day I have been with him since. Here is part of an essay Marie and Buddy's Mac wrote in the 8th grade. My grandmother took me in. She didn't have to, which meant no retirement. The rest of her life was bringing me up. Most 60-year-olds were retired in Florida with palm trees and coconuts. Not Nana. She was home, making sure I eat, study, and go to bed early. She showed me love and loyalty. Whenever I want to give up, she pushes me not to. All she asks is I do good in school. When I grow up, I should be half the person my Nana is. Though Marie sadly died of pulmonary fibrosis complications on January 18, 2017, her heartbroken partner, Buddy, still lives with their grandson, Mac, and guards their endless supply of photos and memories. There were tough times in Marie's life, Buddy said, but there were good times, especially for Mac. He gives me the reason he gave her the reason to keep living even when she was so sick, and he's doing the same for me. And now let me introduce you to the 3 Southie women here beside me. First, Nancy Young. Grief is the price of love, says Nancy, repeating a life lesson she not only learned the hard way, but inherited from a long line of family members' emotional traumas. Breaking the cycle of dysfunction and demons had always been Nancy's priority. But despite distancing herself from suicide and addiction that afflicted the men in her life, her father, her brother, the love of her life, and starting over in a new house, another life lesson emerged. You can run, but you can't hide. Whilst Nancy's story is inspirational enough to stand on its own, Nancy considers her mother, Flo Young, inexorably tied to every aspect of the person she is today. Flo Young's resume is outstanding, evidence of a Southie woman who believed she could change the world for the better and did everything in her power to do so. In the 70s, 80s, and 90s, Flo Young worked unremittingly for Head Start as a family service worker, a position similar to that of a social worker, sans the degree. Nancy knows her mother adored every child that came through the program. My mother saw the good in everyone and always found an excuse or a reason for the trouble. Nancy's fondest memories from her childhood come from being spent in this old colony housing products. You might say we put the word fun in dysfunction, and I mean that to be a compliment. You could walk out the door and there was always someone to hang out with. We lived in the poorest part of town, but we felt a sense of pride shared by all us Slow-Anders. Sadly, the safety and well-being that Flo worked so hard to bestow on all her clients in no way extended her own life. Tragedy knocked at Flo's door far too many times, but somehow she endured and struggled to do what she could to help others. I was always taught that God will only give you what you can handle, Nancy says. I have many times silently thought, why my family? But then answered, why not? Why should I say that someone else should suffer to bear my pain? While Nancy's brothers are recovering heroin addicts, both of whom started to do heroin in their early 30s, she would never place any of the fault of their problems on the place where they grew up. They were grown men who made that choice to stick a needle into their arm, she says. Today is going good for them, but I have no idea what tomorrow will bring. Nancy understands only too well that the whole perception of the power of heroin addiction is different today, that people see it as an epidemic. Still, there is no hell quite like the hell of watching dope change someone you love into someone you don't recognize. It was 1985 when Nancy's sister Karen, who worked in the ICU department at Boston City Hospital, was brutally murdered by her boyfriend, a Vietnam vet, in the midst of a post-traumatic stress disease delusion in which he was seeing a Viet Cong in front of him rather than his beloved girlfriend Karen. 10 years later, when Mark Estes, Nancy's fiance and the only man she ever really loved, was murdered on the streets of South Boston, a murder that has never been solved, Nancy did not think she could find the strength to survive yet another tragedy. 10 years of trying to help someone find his self-worth, and it ends up with him between the yellow tape at a crime scene. But months later, after the unspeakable event happened, I set out on a mission and I completed it. It would have been so much easier to have a pity party for myself. But at the end of the day, you're responsible for what you want to do to be happy. Well, I wanted to have my own house, to move out of the projects, and to do well in my job. And I did that. I will always hear my mother's message to live for today, that it's a gift, and that's why it's called the present. She knew, as I do, that there is not always tomorrow. But most of all, she reminded us to be proud of where we came from, never to be ashamed, and we never were. I'd like to ask Nancy at this point to possibly talk a little bit about her life. Do we have a microphone that we can get here?
I really ask questions.
Do you want to tell why you wanted to write the book?
Well, I guess I just wanted to write the book to let other people know that there's hope. Like, if you work hard enough and you have a good support system, and it happened. A friend of mine, after reading this book, had called me just last week, and she said, Nancy, I just want to let you know, I read that book, she said, and it made me realize she had been fondled by one of her neighbors many years ago, and she went into therapy after reading the book, and she was in therapy, but then she finally confessed it to the therapist, and she's going to confront the person. She did share it with a couple of her siblings, and she said it was because of the book, and that's kind of exactly what I wanted out of it, was to help somebody, and if it helps one person, then that's brilliant.
Was it very difficult for you to talk about all this?
Of course it's difficult. You know, it's interesting, because it's over years, a lot of the stuff, when you start really writing it, it was hard. It was many, even now, I said to Karen, even Anna, when I'm writing up here, I'm like, God, sometimes you struggle sleeping, because it resurrects everything, you know, but if it can help people, then so be it. I hope it does.
Okay, Karen, get ready. Karen Weeks-Rakes is one strong lady. Raised in a household where her father made brute force the daily staple of life, she learned at an early age to use her fists and take no prisoners. The girl who grew up in the old colony projects in Southie, living with a father who beat and humiliated her, who taught her how to protect herself from everyone except him, and a mother who did far worse by never lifting a finger to protect her, has somehow managed to raise 4 amazing kids. Now 58, having left Southie, living on a quiet street in Kennebunk, Karen is very happily married to Joe Rakes, a good and decent man. But life was certainly not always as good. Every day when the young Karen was making her father's bed at the old colony projects in Southie, as she was ordered to do, she would stare at the 38 caliber gun underneath his pillow. The house had always contained guns and rifles, including 2 22 caliber rifles in a corner of the bedroom. Even though the guns were never locked up, their father forbade them to touch them. Aware of his father's violent temper, this was a rule no Weeks kid ever thought of breaking. Karen, who had no choice but to touch the 38 under his pillow, often wondered what would happen if she used it to kill her father. How badly I wanted to do it, Karen admits. Jail didn't seem that much worse than the house I lived in. But I guess I just never had the guts to do it. Today, Karen considers herself blessed that her life with Joe brought her a woman who finally showed her what a loving and decent mother could be like. To Karen, her mother-in-law, Nancy Rakes, epitomized everything good and important about a Southie woman and mother. She was one tough lady, Karen said, and totally loyal to her kids. They might get in trouble, but she stood by them, telling them to hold their heads up high. She was a gorgeous woman, red hair and beautiful blue eyes, a real sweetheart who would help anyone who needed her help. But she didn't take any shit from anyone. She could knock out any guy. Joe always said to watch out for his mother's left hand. She had a vicious left hook, but Joe adored her. He would go down the house every morning and make sure she had her paper and her grocery shopping. When she loved you, you knew it, and I knew she loved me. When Karen's own mother was in a rehab center, Karen, who was married to Joe with 4 children of her own, went frequently to visit, unable to turn her back on the woman who had been such an appalling mother. During one such visit, while Karen was carefully setting her mother's thin hair in rollers, her mother said, "You know, I was just thinking about your father. He was a good husband and a good provider. He abused our kids, but he was good to me, and that's all that matters." Karen put down the comb. "I could have choked her to death at that very moment," she said, "but I just walked out." A tattoo on Karen's right wrist reads, "Loyalty." "Loyalty pretty much represents who I am," she exclaims. "I am above all else loyal to my family and my friends, and especially my husband, the #1 person in my life. And no matter where I'm living, I'm loyal to Southie. I'm proud of being from the projects of Southie. No other place in the world where I'd rather have grown up. That's what made me the person I am today. If Southie was the same as it was when I was growing up, I would never have moved out." Karen, I wonder if you could just tell them why you wrote the book, why it convinced you. I had to convince her, but she finally decided to, for one major reason.
The main reason was because there were so many things said about my brother Kevin, and people criticizing him, and you know.
Can you hear her?
No.
Talk a little closer.
Hello. Okay, like I said, the main reason was because a lot of people were criticizing my brother Kevin. They had a lot to say, and I know my brother as a totally different person. And I finally agreed that I would do it just for people to understand the kind of house that we grew up in and the mentality of my father, and why Kevin at 18 years old could be so easily attracted to that kind of money, doing something that he was basically raised to do, which was use his fists. I look at my kids and I think of them at 18, and if someone's offering them a couple of $1,000s, you know, to do something, I don't think there's many 18-year-old kids that would say no. You know, I mean, they might, it depends, but like I said, growing up in my house with the mentality of my mother and father, that's what we were raised to do. You know, if I had a fight, and I wasn't a fighter when I was a young kid, I wasn't a fighter. I started fighting when I got older. But my father would say to me, either you beat them or I'm gonna beat you, and which of us is gonna do the more damage? So I would just be like, well, I guess it's your unlucky day, because I'm not taking a beat from him. You know, but that's why when he and I had first talked to me about it, that's the reason I agreed. I didn't want to, because a lot of things I buried for years, I didn't want to remember. I just, you know, they were blocked out, blacked out, whatever, and I didn't want to remember them. I just wanted to keep them that way. So doing this, it did a lot of, brought up a lot of things, you know, and they weren't good things. They weren't good memories. And I just had I had some hard times, and a lot of people don't know, but in November of 2013, because of everything that I started thinking about and going through, I tried to kill myself. And you know, Joe, he got me to the hospital and stuff, and then it was just, you know, my kids, like, how could I be that selfish, you know what I mean? How could I do something like that to them? And it took a long time for them to really forgive me, you know? But like I said, it was because I blocked out so many things I didn't want to remember, and doing this, it brought it all back, and, you know, I mean, you can only be strong for so long. You know, I'm strong for my kids and stuff, but, you know, every now and then, you know, you get a little weak yourself. But I got past it, you know. I mean, I was okay. They made me stay there for 4 days with like these really crazy people. You know? And I was just like, oh my God. They were like, today we're gonna paint a frame. And I was like, oh, Joe, get me out of here. You know, it was bad, but, you know, that's one of the reasons. Like, I heard a lot of stuff today because Jimmy got killed. And I heard a lot of things. And you have to understand something. I knew him as a different man. You know, yeah, he did what he did. And I don't condone it. I don't say it was, you know, oh, he had a reason for doing it, whatever. But he did a lot of good things too. He was good to me. He was very, very good to my kids, especially my son. So you see a whole different side of people, you know? You see a whole different side. And I mean, do I feel bad that he's gone? Of course I feel bad. He had family. You know, he had family that loved him just like you all have family, you know? And if somebody in your house, you know, you'd be heartbroken. But it's just, I see a different side of people, you know? And I don't know, maybe if you read it, you can understand it. If you can't understand it, there's nothing I can do to change your mind, you know? And I'm not gonna try to change anybody's mind. But I'm just saying that there's a different side of people that you may not have the whole picture of. You know, in the newspaper and all that, you get bits and pieces, You know, they said a lot of stuff about my brother that was lies, out and out lies. They said things about my husband that were lies.
You want to talk about that?
The picture in City Hall back in 1976, I don't know, I'm sure some of you remember it, the flag, and during busing, yeah, the flag, the attack, the soiling of Old Glory. Well, that's my husband, Joe. That was Joe that had the flag. And 20 years later, Ted Landsmark came out and said that Joe never touched him with that flag. He never touched him. He was at Mass General. He was treated by a black doctor who said the press is out here, we have to play it up for them, who put all the bandages on his face and said he had multiple facial fractures. The only thing he had was a little cut on his nose because somebody hit him from behind. And
What happened when we asked him for the photo?
oh, I guess, well, you asked him. I've had some conversations with Stanley Foreman, the one that took the picture. I've had some conversations, they weren't always nice. But Phyllis had asked if they could use the picture for the book. And he said, yeah, he said, but he wasn't gonna charge, he just wanted an autograph. And Phyllis said that she'd be happy to give him an autograph, and he said, no, I want Karen's autograph. So she gave me the book last Thursday to sign. She said, write whatever you want. So I just wrote, Stanley, thanks for the picture. You know, he can take it however he wants. I had asked him before, does Landsmark still get paid to be a victim? And he was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I said, well, he did Chronicle and he lied. I said, so for 20 years he lied. Then they did an interview in 2013 with him and Joe. And again, he come out and he admitted that he lied. But in the meantime, my husband's the poster child for racism. You know, and I followed him his whole life. And he's nothing like that. So.
Does anyone have a question? Projects, anything at all? We can hold on to this. Thank you so much. Okay, I urge you all to take a deep breath as you listen to just a few pages of my co-author, Anna Weeks' indescribably powerful chapter. At age 21, when Anna reached sobriety, the question was, what was she going to do with her newfound life? Move out of South Boston, where she had lived her whole life? Get away from the people and places that had triggered her addictive personality? Try to combat her eating disorder, her compulsive shopping habits, attend AA every day of her life? None of the above, Anna says. Instead, I did what any good addict would do. Find another addict to take care of. and that wasn't hard. In 1985, at age 21, less than a year after she got sober, Anna met the man who would change her life. Relating the story of their life together is powerfully difficult for Anna. He has been the reason I've always hesitated to tell my story, she says. But there is no way I can eliminate the beautiful man who was my entire world for 25 years. But what she can do is change his name, referring him in the book only as Michael, along with some other details to try and protect his privacy. But the truth is that our life together was so filled with pain and joy, despair and hope, drugs and abuse, love and dysfunction that it can never be forgotten, Anna says. Michael made me the person I am today, and while he nearly destroyed me, I accept the lion's share of the blame for our nightmare of a marriage. He was the sick one who struggled to become well. I was the well one who never accepted or understood his illness. All I did was love him so fiercely that it nearly killed the two of us. For now, this is my version, and I share it with hopes that other women may somehow find solace in the ending. I surely have. Anna is brutally honest about this life with Michael. In a demented yet careful manner, I proceeded to throw away the next 20 plus years of my life. Good years I never have a chance to live again. Years when I could have become a mother and raised a family the way my parents had. Instead, I spent the years chasing, enabling, fixing, begging, ignoring, and fearing this one man, and ending up defeated. In fact, I should have ended up dead. But I was a powerful addict myself. In no way was I going down without a serious fight. Anna saw more of her husband in Massachusetts prisons than she did anywhere else. If Michael received a 3 or 4 year sentence, he was eligible for 3 visits per week. And Anna was there for everyone. All of us who entered the prison as visitors were doing time right along with our inmates. So Anna lived the double life. Trying to stay upright on a dangerous merry-go-round she felt powerless to stop. If Michael were home, out of prison, she was waiting for him to erupt. If he were in jail, she was waiting for a phone call or sitting on a prison bench. I learned to pretend that my life was good and normal, just like the lives of the teachers with whom I worked, or the people I passed in the street. It was inevitable that some people knew what my real life was. Southie was a small town in so many ways. I knew I wasn't the only woman in town who was leading a double life, but no one would ever dare confront me any more than I would confront any other woman like me. So long as I dressed well, put on lots of makeup to cover the bruises, and kept my head high, I was fine. The moment did arrive, however, when she at last began to understand she had no choice but to end their tortured relationship, for his sake more than mine. Most likely I made his life in pain and addiction worse. I was prison for him, and releasing him would be the best gift I could give Michael. And then the next chapter of her life began, when the man who had been her good friend for many years, often saving her life when Michael was under the throes of a drug-addled rage, was released from jail after serving 5.5 years for his participation in 5 murders. Talk about jumping from the frying pan into the fire. As her attraction to this man, Kevin Weeks, grew, Anna had to digest what he had done during his 25 years with Whitey Bulger. It was one thing to love a drug addict with mental illness, another thing to love an accessory to murder. And not just an accessory, but someone who had witnessed the murders, buried the bodies, and reburied. Why would I want to get involved with a man like that? Why couldn't I just say he was no good and walk away? Why did I continually see good in this man? A warmth and gentleness I could not close my eyes to. But in her heart, despite her inner turmoil, Anna knew she was doing the right thing. I knew who Kevin was, and I knew, despite his past, that he had completely forsaken a life of crime, that he was a good man who would treat me well and would offer me a calm, quiet, loving life. I believed the pledge he repeated every morning, that this day he would not commit another crime. His drama, like mine, was in the past. We both believed we deserved better, and we were determined to give that to one another. And that, miraculously, was exactly what happened when Anna experienced the happiest day of her life. At age 51, November 3rd, 2015, at 12:58 p.m., fulfilling a lifetime dream of becoming a mother. I glanced up at Kevin, looking as handsome and proud as ever, the one man who had loved me with a strength I would never stop cherishing, as he used his gloved hands to guide our son Julian into the light, insisting he had to tug him to get into this world. My heart swelled with joy, for now I was complete. All the suffering and disappointments of my former life had disappeared. Okay, Anna, your turn.
Thank you, Phyllis, thank you. I almost cried with that ending, but 2 more babies after that. We have 3 babies now, and I'm 54. My youngest is 6 months old. So life certainly did take a turn for the better. Kevin is at home tonight with these babies, babysitting. He's the stay-home mom because I teach full-time at a Boston public school, so his life is very different today as well. I mainly want to talk about the reason why I wrote this book, and it's very, very ironic, the turn of events today, but I became very friendly with Phyllis, as she spoke earlier, due to my husband's reluctance about writing this book. You know, they would argue, he would swear at her, and I would say, oh my God, if her husband hears you talk like this to her, and it would go on, and I would beg him to call her back, and he would tell me how she didn't know anything, and he had to explain everything to her 5 times, and where the hell did she grow up, and where was she, and so forth and so on. So after I would smooth everything over, I would say, please call her, Kevin, you know, she made a commitment to this, so forth, so on. So, I would go to book signings with Kevin, and I would be sitting on my hands because, of course, the whole discussion would center around Whitey and his brutality, and, you know, how could Kevin stay with Whitey for as long as he did, and so forth and so on. And I would want to speak up and say that, yes, there was a dark side to Whitey, but there was also a light side to him. He took care of our town and all who lived in there, like, he protected us. We didn't go to police. If there was a family in distress, a family who needed money, he was right there to help them. Yes, he slept with underage women, and he did some horrific things, but in my eyes, he was, I say it in the book, I said, as most people were honoring the President of the United States, we were in fact honoring Whitey. And I feel that way somewhat to this day because our town has turned so, it's horrific with the drug abuse. And yes, Whitey and those men sold drugs, but they would never allow heroin or opiates onto our streets. We didn't have the murders like we have today, so I have a much, maybe it's distorted, but a much different remembrance of the man. So I was teaching today and I was leaving school and everyone was knocking on my door. Anna's what, you know, Whitey's dead and Whitey was murdered, and half the people said, good, he deserves exactly what he got. And then another teacher, a real young teacher, she said, it's kind of sad, Anna. And so I thought about all that on the way over here, and I just couldn't believe how ironic it was. But nevertheless, it takes me to why I wanted to write this book. I wanted to first offer hope, as Nancy says, and I had no idea about Karen's past, nor did my husband till very late in life. And it bothers him to this day, what happened in that household. Kevin was more private, Karen had much more courage, and I'll never get over it because I didn't know why Karen wrote the book until I was at one of the book signings, and she had mentioned it. And you know, along the same lines, people would look at me and say, you married a man who committed 5 murders, are you all right, Anna? And I would, you know, weigh this out at night, and the only thing I can say is, I got to know Kevin through my horrific years with my first husband, and yes, he was my protector, but he was my friend. And he had a bright side to him. I loved the way that Kevin could talk to anyone. It could be a street person, it could be, you know, a court officer. He treated them with the same respect, and that was very, very attractive to me. So there was many reasons why I needed to write this book, but the main reason was I felt like I needed to defend Southie. Anytime that I say I'm from Southie, to this day, I get a look like, oh, that one there, she's from Southie, especially in school. I'm automatically connected with whitey or forced busing or a negative aspect, or someone's bringing up something that was on the news in the 70s. You know, they always would, you know, interview a woman who was coming out of a bar room with no teeth. So we were always portrayed as uneducated and